Flourishing Unfiltered, the podcast for high achievers who seek a professional life that feels as good as it looks.
We talk about the unseen journey of struggles on the path to success that people rarely talk about.
I'm Karen Smith, positive psychology practitioner and leadership coach and consultant.
And I'm Dr. Micah Nyhouse, positive psychology and self-leadership speaker and consultant.
Before we begin today, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're recording. We pay our deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
As we share our stories today, we honour the rich tradition of storytelling that has been passed down through generations.
If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back, and today is one of those days where I'm absolutely fangirling because we have Stephanie Harrison with us. Stephanie, for those of you who don't know her yet, is an expert in the science of happiness and the creator of the New Happy philosophy. She has a master's degree in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she was later an instructor as well. And she was previously the director of learning at Thrive Global, leading the development of science-based programs that improve well-being. Now, her company, The New Happy, has revolutionized the way that people understand and pursue happiness. Their artwork, newsletter, videos, podcasts, and resources reach millions of people around the world every month, including Karen and myself. Now, Stephanie is a Harvard Business Review and CNBC contributor, and her expertise has been featured in publications such as Fast Company, Forbes, and Architectural Digest. She's a regular speaker at Fortune 500 companies and advises on employee well-being and company culture. Her first book, New Happy, was released by Penguin Random House in May 2024 and was an absolute instant international bestseller, and I absolutely adore it. It is the most gorgeous book full of science, of happiness, together with her beautiful artwork. And by the way, what I should mention too is that Stephanie obviously has her own podcast too, where she shares tools, science, and support that help you to live a happier life in less than 5 minutes, which is fantastic for those who are time poor. Stephanie, I'm so stoked to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with both of you. It's such an honor.
Stephanie, again, I loved reading your book, especially also because it already does what we're trying to achieve here on the show, and that is being raw and honest and vulnerable and personal and not trying to put on a facade that tells a wrong story. It starts off very personal with your story that also explains sort of your journey into what inspired you to start the New Happy Co. Are you happy to share with us part of that journey and what inspired you?
Of course. And I so appreciate the mission that you've set for yourselves and that you're pursuing, because I think it's so critically important that we pull back the curtain, so to speak, on people's inner or authentic experiences. So I'm always happy to do that. I have always struggled with being happy ever since I can remember being young. I never really have memories of feeling a sense of real contentment or of acceptance of myself or feeling like I was okay in many ways. And I just took that as the norm, I think. I just thought that that was how everyone felt, or at least how I felt. And I really wanted to be happy, so I tried to do all of the things that I thought would make me happy. I tried to pursue the goals that I was supposed to set and be the person who I thought I should be. And ultimately, it all sort of came to a head when I was in my early 20s, when I had a series of physical and mental and emotional health crises all colliding at the same time. And it was a little bit of a wake-up call in terms of recognizing that perhaps I needed to do things a little bit differently. And that's what really set me on the path of wanting to study happiness, to try and understand. I had the awareness, I think, that my understanding of happiness was wrong. And so I wanted to figure out something that was a little bit closer to the truth. And so I ended up going to grad school and starting to develop this philosophy of happiness. And then, as I kind of say in the book, like, life gave me this undesirable chance to put it into practice when my partner Alex became very sick out of nowhere, and suddenly I'm in my 20s and I'm a caregiver, and no one can figure out what's going on with Alex, and we're desperate, and every day is a struggle to get through, and they only get harder and harder and harder, and that goes on for many years, and continues to persist in many ways. And all of those challenges made my old difficulties seem very light in comparison. And what was different, though, about this time was that I had this new set of beliefs and a deeper understanding of true happiness, and I was able to use that to not only cope, but actually also to experience joy in a period of profound, prolonged suffering, which I never imagined was possible. And so a lot of everything that I share in my work is also tested and used by me, and oftentimes is even inspired by my own experiences and how I've tried to translate the research into something that can be practical and useful for somebody, especially somebody who's suffering.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know this is, I can only imagine this must have been an incredibly hard journey, and it sounds like you're still on it. I don't know if you mind me asking, but where on this journey are you and Alex now? Is he getting better, or where are things at?
Yeah, it's been a whole roller coaster in many ways. Thankfully, things have been improving in some ways, but we still have, he still deals with a lot of major challenges. He still has a lot of struggles with his health. We've managed to make some inroads. We also current challenge that we've been going through has been we are not able to engage in society because Alex is very vulnerable to illness and to infection, and with the pandemic ongoing, it's not safe for us, and so we've been isolated from literally every single person in our lives for years and years because unfortunately a lot of society has given up on people with disabilities and who are vulnerable and have sort of cast them aside, and we are a part of that group of people. And so now we have a new set of challenges, which is being forcibly cut off from the social connection that's so important for well-being and happiness. And so, there are always things that people are going through, and difficulties that I think shape us in so many ways. And what I've really learned is about how we find joy, like amidst those challenges and alongside of them, even when things are really hard or they're not going how we would ever dream of them going in the ways that we would want to.
And thank you so much for sharing so much already, Steph. This is, it's a fascinating when we, like you said, when we pull back the curtains, there's always a lot more going on than what people realize. I'd love to tap into what you just mentioned there around, discovering new ways to find joy. Because one of the things that we do like to talk about with our guests when we hear a little bit about the struggles or the challenges that are happening behind the scenes, there's generally some unique way in which they approach, getting on top of this and navigating it. Can you maybe talk through some of the strategies and techniques, what's in your toolbox, essentially?
Yeah, I think that for me, there's sort of a broad, high-level approach, which is like what I outline in the philosophy, which is that helping other people during this time has been what has saved me. It has been the single source of renewal, of energy, of strength, of joy, of fulfillment, and it has given me more than I have ever given. And I have so many lovely people who I get to connect to in the New Happy community, and they will message me and say like, oh, I thank you for making this or for doing this or so on, and it really helped me. And what they don't understand is how much they are helping me, how much the opportunity to be there to support somebody and the gratitude and kindness with which they receive it has given me everything that I needed. And so much of it's very interesting because like building the New Happy, where we give everything away for free. So every single thing I do is just available for anyone who wants it, and that's because I believe like happiness should be accessible to people, especially people who don't have access to the material resources that make getting support sometimes inaccessible for them. And so what I realized, like the whole time as I was building the new happy, was also the time when I was going through this, well, Alex and I were going through this incredibly difficult time period. And the two have been so wound together in this really interesting way. It's such a fascinating experience, you know, to build a platform that's devoted to happiness while you are going through something really hard. And what's been fascinating is that I think that I guess my hope is that people can feel that in a way, because what I hear from people is like, not that the new happy helped them when things were good. It was that it helped them when things were hard. And, you know, that kind of shared experience of suffering is so neglected in positive psychology in so many ways. At least it was in my experience in what I was learned in school and what's kind of traditionally talked about. But I now see these two things as very deeply intertwined, because someone else's suffering gives me the chance to help them, and vice versa. And that is what gives me happiness. And so and my suffering is also what equips me to be able to help other people. And so it's this interconnected web of support that we can tap ourselves into that provides us with that strength that we need in hard times. And so that's my broader approach. And then more practically, it's like simply like, if I'm in a bad mood or if I'm having a hard time, like, who can I go help? Like, I can go do something. I don't have to sit here. I can go and make a difference for somebody else, no matter how small it is. And that's what really, I think, drives me and has been my approach.
Oh, that's really beautiful,
so
Steph.
Yeah.
And it actually reminds me of an earlier episode that we aired. There was a quote from a sports person here in Australia, and I pulled the quote up because I wanted to make sure I didn't get it wrong. But they said, when you lose yourself in the service of others is when you truly find yourself. And I don't know, is that something that you'd say sort of resonates with yourself?
Yeah, I completely agree. 100%.
Yeah. And it is amazing how, you know, those small little actions that we can take to make a difference in someone else's day actually can have a beautiful effect on us and how we feel as well. And I love that you started broad too and went practical, because that's part of what Micah and I try and do, not just here in the podcast, but I'd say even just in our work when we're coaching our clients as well. It's great to think quite broadly and then bring it back to some practical steps.
100%. I find it interesting also what you mentioned earlier about, you know, that when you went through studying your master's in applied positive psychology, that, you know, that whole focus on, you know, the maybe a little bit more the suffering or those so-called negative emotions, which obviously no emotion is negative per se and so forth, that it wasn't very well integrated. And as you would know in positive psychology, we talk about these waves of development of the field of the science and so forth. And yes, in the beginning, we know very well that it was just overly focusing on those so-called positive emotions, and that, you know, it was neglecting a whole sort of other half that was sort of assigned to traditional psychology and so forth. And I hope that these days research in the field is slowly getting better, but it is probably still a little bit behind. So I'm happy that you're touching on it. You mentioned earlier, Steph, that it's become so important, the community that you've created around this. I was wondering, are you talking about the book club? Is there a particular community, and would you love to share a little bit about the book club? I know you recently started.
Yeah, of course. When I talk about the community, I'm just talking about like literally anybody who follows the new happy in any place that they can follow, and anyone who engages. So community has always been the core pillar of the new happy, I would say. Like it's because obviously I argue that happiness happens it's not a solo experience, it's a communal one. And so I wanted to build it with that in mind. So like just as an example, back in the day when, gosh, I must have been in the summer of 2020 when I had just quit my job at Thrive, and I had just started the new happy Instagram, and I had no idea what I was doing. I started doing these these challenges every week. I had like 1,000 followers at the time, and I would facilitate on chat on Instagram these weekly challenges for people that I had designed that were behavior change challenges that would help them to implement the research in their own lives. And I would have like 15 groups of people of 10, and I would jump in and facilitate them, and I would answer questions and, you know, answer DMs and doing all that stuff. And then I like made them all little badges that they could have at the end, and like they could put them on their stories. And I did this for like a year and a half as the account grew and grew and grew. And eventually it became impossible. Instagram started limiting my ability to message people, so I had to stop. They were like, you must be a scammer.
Oh my goodness.
So like the community has always been like the core thing, and my goal has always been like, how do we get this information? There's so much great research, but it's not in people's hands. How do we get it in their hands, you know? And then after that ended, I started doing like more kind of like general community check-ins and answering people's questions and all that kind of stuff. So there have been all these ways that I've tried to weave in community, and like even more like having people send in voice notes to the podcast talking about their experiences. Anyways, I could go on. It's been very much embedded in the quality of the work. And so all of this was, again, really what like fueled me and supported me, was trying to be there for the people who in those moments like might not have had any other support or anyone to draw upon. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the community. And then I'm always trying to think about manifestations of that. So yeah, I started this book club, and it's a free 5-week program for anybody who wants to read the book and apply it in their lives. And they're like these 2-hour Zoom calls that I do in different time zones to accommodate everybody. And we have the most amazing conversations about the topics and how to apply it and the challenges that people go through. And we're almost done, but if there's enough demand, I'll do it again. Everyone says they want to go through the whole program again, which would be really fun.
Oh, how beautiful is that? And Karen, I'm thinking you and I need to sign up for this. I don't know, but you know,
Yeah.
like, it's incredible what you're doing for the community. You do so much, and you ask yourself, you know, we are so grateful that you're even here talking to us, because you must be so busy. And here's one little follow-up question I want to ask as well, and that's because, you know, it sounds like I'm hearing the personal struggle, right? The whole behind the scenes. I'm hearing what fuels you, whether that's, you know, in your own private life, even prior to meeting Alex. But then, I mean, the whole journey with Alex, that is unfathomable. I don't even know what it must be like to go through that. And yet also, you know, on this podcast, we talk to people who've sort of successfully built a business, or, you know, are a leader in their field or whatever. So I am interested also in the business side of things, because, you know, you just mentioned before 2020, you started on Instagram. Oh, I hate hearing those stories. Makes me feel so inadequate. I've been on there for way too long. But anyway, and I'm just wondering, your business just seems to thrive and grow, and obviously it's achieving so many beautiful things. Do you experience any struggles on the business side of things? Are there ever any times where you feel like this isn't working, this is not good enough, or I should be doing more of that? Are there any struggles on that side of things?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think like I was on a call earlier, and someone asked me like, what like struggles have you had? And I said to her, like, it would be shorter for me to say like what struggles I've not had. Like it would just be like there would be silence, basically. Like I am just figuring it out as I go, like everybody. I never had a plan. I think that I used to be a very type A person. I was, as you know, if you read my book, I was obsessed with being perfect. I was obsessed with achieving. I was obsessed with being hyper independent. In short, I was like totally sucked into old happy, which is what I call it. And I wanted to plan my whole life out. Like, I wanted to know exactly when A was going to happen so that B could happen and C could happen. And I wanted to control everything. And I wanted to like not only have a firm grasp on everything, but I wanted to have like a death grip grasp on everything so that it was like all going to work out, you know, like very kind of like intense desire to control things. And when Alex got sick, I realized how futile that was, because like here I had planned everything, I had done all the things I was supposed to do, and like life happened, right? And I think all of us as adults, we learn that in one way or another as we get older, and you get struck with one of life's inevitable slings. And so I sort of abandoned all of that, and I could see it wasn't really serving me either. It was obviously just a coping mechanism. And when I set out to do the new happy, I had no plans, as I said. I just had this idea of like, I want to share this philosophy with people. And like, that's about all I know. And, that's, you know, like I hated social media. Like I didn't even have a personal account when I started, but I was trapped in my house and I thought, how am I going to reach people? I'm going to have to suck this up and like deal with it anyways. And, you know, I was a caregiver, I was a full-time caregiver. And so I was just trying to like squeeze in doing something around my tasks and everything like that. And I thought, well, this is what I have. Like, it's almost like being, like sometimes I think that we get in our heads about stuff when we're thinking about our business or our platform or whatever. And it's like, be like a carpenter. Like, what tools do I have and what is the job that I need to do? And in many ways, because I was so constrained by those challenges in my life, I couldn't think ahead. And so I wasn't able to get sucked into that like control mindset that I wanted of like, what could I do or what might happen or whatever, which I would have definitely been inclined to do otherwise. But I was just trying to get through the day. And my job was just like, how do I tell somebody about this idea just today and do something in that way? So I never had like sort of like a master plan or anything like that. And I mean, you heard me say, like, I don't charge for anything I make. That creates a lot of problems. Like, you know, like that leads to a lot of challenges. But, you know, like I don't really think of the New Happy as a business. I think of it as a movement, as a community, and as an educational vehicle. And so for me, that is kind of what drives it. But yes, like this is my long-winded way of saying, yes, there have been so many challenges along the way. So many times I haven't known what to do or how to move forward. And every one of them has like temporarily tripped me up. But I guess the thing that I'm proud of is that I always get back up.
That's a beautiful little point there too. And as you were telling that story, Stephanie, I was thinking, oh gosh, this sounds like me. Was never a big fan of social media. Still to this day, I have apprehension around using it at times. Michael and I discuss this quite regularly. And, you know, it was something that I had to sort of like I had to sort of suck it up and be like, all right, well, if you're going to have a business, you got to be present. But it's interesting just hearing more so even about like your journey of like letting things go. I know myself, I'm very much somebody that likes structure, likes processes, knows what the next sort of like 6 months looks like. And hearing you say, you know, just sort of, it's almost like sort of go with the flow a little bit. Selfishly for myself, but also perhaps for the benefit of our listeners, I'd love to know what are some lessons that you've learned about yourself when you went from maybe having a little bit more like structure and rigor to just going where and seeing where the path takes you. What are some maybe key lessons that you've learned about yourself in that process?
First is just how like tightly clenched I was. First of all, like learn a self-awareness, a self-leadership lesson. You know, like how tightly I was holding on without even knowing it. And how much of a weight that was. Like the weight of trying to control an uncontrollable world is a burden that I don't really particularly want to carry because I've got a bunch of other burdens. So like my whole job is, what do I cast off in order to make space for me being able to carry the burdens that matter to me? And I don't think of them as burdens in my normal life, but just to illustrate as like an example of how conceptualizing this is like something that I was unconsciously picking up and then consciously refusing to put down was very helpful because I I think that like when I think, for example, about like just tying this a little to social media and the content that I see, for example, on a place like LinkedIn, like so much of the content that's on LinkedIn is predicated on the assumption that like you have complete control over your life, and like that's, and also that it's a desirable thing to do so, right? Like it's all about what we're talking about. And so I say things like have a morning routine, or like cultivate your habits, and like all this kind of stuff, right? And I'm like, I don't have a morning routine. I don't ever think about my habits. Like, I don't. And I haven't this whole time. And I probably will never, because my life is chaotic and full of challenges. And I would imagine that most people's lives are, like, and there's this huge space, like there's this huge gap in the discourse about like real people's lives and how to meet them where they are with real tools that can help in the moment, versus this like idealized, like kind of like hustle culture, perfection of productivity standard that's put forward so frequently that ultimately just ends up shaming people. And that's what I realized is like I was doing it not from a place of, oh, this makes me feel good, but from a place of shame and of feeling like I needed to do that to prove that I was worthy or good, or like could, make my business or my work a success in some way. And like I was doing my work in hospital rooms. And I'm not alone. Like I know there are so many hundreds of thousands of people out there who are doing the very best they can in very difficult circumstances. And I think that what matters is just like I guess what I've learned is like it matters if you just do the work. Like if you show up. If you show up for yourself and you show up for others. And if you're somebody who needs to plan for that or needs certain routines or structures to put yourself in that state, and you have the privilege and the ability to do that, great. But for those of us who don't, who have other things that we're dealing with in our lives and difficulties, like you can still show up and do it. And in fact, like I think that these people have a profound experience that they can share that's really, really necessary and missing in so much of the way that we talk about well-being.
Oh, I could listen to you for hours and probably cry, the entire time, because everything resonates so much. And I can see this graphic that you need to create. You probably have already, I don't know. But, this transition from psychological rigidity, if that's a word, I'm not sure, to psychological flexibility. Because it's so true that so much of what's going on, it seems like everybody is trying to clutch on so tightly and control whatever they can control in their lives, where they would probably benefit a lot more from learning to unclench their jaws, right, and sort of let go and go with the flow. But also I'm sort of happy, sad about it, because I feel like it creates a lot of work for us, because all these people are going to end up on autopilot and being like really languishingly unhappy. So it's like, there's work. But you shared so much gold there. If we were to turn that into a little bit of advice for whether that's for all those people on LinkedIn, whether that's for your younger self, whether that's for the people who usually come to your circles of community, what kind of bits of advice would you give them?
I think I would say that desire for control is totally understandable, and it's also like in many cases a trauma response to these unprecedented times that we've been living in. And it's totally okay. It's totally fine to feel that way. And that we need to create safe spaces for ourselves that are full of love and acceptance for us to be able to step out of those. Like for me, creating a loving environment where it was okay for me to quit my job and do something that was totally wild, with, and do it with no plan and no understanding of what would happen. Because like at the end of the day, like my job wasn't what made me acceptable or worthy or deserving of love. And I think that we find ourselves in these positions of control when we're not willing to accept ourselves in all of our humanity. And I was thinking earlier today about the the Walt Whitman line, like, do I contradict myself? I'm full of multitudes. And I was thinking about that and how to your point, like, this psychological flexibility and this embrace of all of our multitudes would help us so much, rather than just leaning into one part of ourselves or demanding that there's a part of us that takes control, and really creating this space for all of us. Like, so as an example, I've always been a really sensitive person, probably not a surprise to you guys, but I didn't know how to manage my emotions, and I also thought it was a flaw and a problem. And so I would repress my emotions at work, and I would think, oh, this is bad. I should never get upset if we lose a client, or if my feelings are hurt by something somebody says, or whatever, right? Any sort of emotional experience. And it helped me when I went to work at a company that had more tolerance for emotions and more acceptance for people's authentic selves and their expression, because I thought, oh, okay, I don't have to hold on to that so tightly. I don't have to perform this version of myself that isn't so sensitive, and I can be more of who I am. And so from a practical perspective, I know a lot of people listening to this podcast are leaders and executive people in positions of power. Like, how do we create environments that are loving and accepting for people, where they can sit down and go, oof, like, this is all of who I am, and like, I'm a mess, and that's okay, and you're a mess too, and like, let's sit together in the mess. Like, that is what I want from the world. And I guess that's what I also am trying in my own very small way to create.
Oh, how beautiful is that? And isn't it so weird? What always, has me thinking or surprised is how often people assume that showing up wholly and authentically means all of a sudden we become unprofessional and don't have a filter anymore. Do you know what I mean? I feel like if the world understood that there's a difference between the two, we wouldn't have such a problem with people showing up authentically.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, and I think that can be the difference too. Like, I know, Michael, we've spoken about this before too, this need to show up authentically, and it has been a topic on the podcast too previously. But people really buy into that. Like, that's what they love when they do get to see that true, authentic self. I know that, even in my coaching calls, I'll get people come in and they often expect it to almost sort of be like unless it's what they've been referred, but they almost expect it to sort of roll out in a particular format, and it's going to be a very rigid and professional conversation. And whilst try and maintain that, you've still got to bring your own flavour in and your own authenticity as well. And I love that that's very much what I'm picking up as a core essence of your approach, Stephanie.
Thank you, that's so generous.
Yeah, no, and I think it's just a true reflection on yourself. And I've loved everything about this conversation, from like it's almost like challenging societal norms, to being true to yourself, to, letting, sort of like the wind take you a little bit with your journey, and just let it follow its direction. And I think there's some beautiful little tips and tools that you've hidden in here, that are hidden within this conversation, and many more of them within your book as well, which is what we'd love to hear just a little bit more about here. And I'm just trying to think here, what's the best? Maybe just share with us a tool or two from your book that you really love, that our listeners might also love, and might inspire them to have a little bit more of a read.
Let's see. I would say one tool that I find very helpful and that I use all the time is one I call the breakup, which is about helping you to cultivate unconditional self-acceptance. And basically, we've been conditioned into this level of grading ourselves, right? Just like we do in school. So in school, you get an A, you're a good kid. And if you get a D or an F or whatever it is in whatever country you're listening to, you're a bad kid. And then as we get older, we adopt that behavior. And so I made a mistake when I was, speaking on this podcast. I said something that I could have been more articulate. Therefore, I am a bad, unacceptable, unlovable, unworthy person, right? And the way that I frame it is like almost in a sentence when you smush two kind of statements together, right? I did this and therefore I'm bad. And the breakup is saying, no, those are two sentences. So you split them up and you say, I did this, and then period, I am bad. And then once you do that, you can separate them further and you can say, I did this, And I'm not bad, actually. I'm still worthy. I'm still a good human being. I'm still deserving of love. And when you do that, it allows you to not only learn from whatever happened, so maybe I need to practice a little bit more in my speaking cadence or have talking points prepared or whatever it is, but also then to implement that and put it into practice, because my self-worth is no longer on the line because of the very human moment that I had. And it's this profound activity that takes like 30 seconds, and it helps you to shift out of this framework that old happy instills in us, which is that you're not worthy if you're imperfect, and helps you to realize, in fact, you're a human being, you will never be perfect, and you are always worthy as you are. And so that's something I use pretty much all throughout my day as I go through my day making all of my human mistakes.
This is brilliant. And this actually it is almost like a bit of a throwback for me too, Stephanie, because I remember, you know, when I was working in schools, inevitably students make some poor choices. And one of the big things that I always would say to them is, you're not a bad person for this. This was just a poor behavior or a poor choice that we've made. So sort of separating that, you know, from themselves, you know, because it does make it easier to sort of like pull it apart and go, oh, okay, I'm not bad at my core. I've just made a poor decision here. It's such a great tip. And obviously there's many, many more. So where can people find out more about your work, your book? Where's the best spot for them to be able to reach out and learn a bit more about the New Happy and all the great work and positive vibes that you share with everybody?
Oh, thank you. The best place to find out more or to learn about the book is thenewhappy.com. Everything is available there, and on social media, it's @newhappyco. And I'm starting to mentally think about the next book and what I'd like it to be about, and starting to think through that. But really, my focus is helping to sort of get this message out there, because I think that happiness has been relegated to an individual personal issue, and I think it's actually the secret to our social problems. And so I want to help get the book in people's hands so that they can see that and start contributing to it. And so I'm probably going to run more book clubs, and I offer lots of free tools and support. So whatever I can do to help, I'm here.
Wow, I feel like you just opened up a massive can of worms. We need to have you back and talk about what you just said there.
Anytime.
That it's not an individual problem, but a societal one.
I'd love it. Anytime. I'd love to come back.
And you know that our show is sponsored by the Future of Flourishing. So, you know, and that's sort of their whole mission, is to put it back in the hands of society and create collectives around helping individuals to flourish and so forth. So it just fits so perfectly. Stephanie, obviously we will make sure we link to your socials, to your website, and everything else in our show notes, and LinkedIn as well, so people can find you, connect with you, and tap into the many beautiful communities you make available to everybody for free. I mean, that's incredible.
Thank you so much.
As we said in the beginning, we are the biggest fans. Thank you for being such a wonderful human and role model, both personally and professionally. It's been such an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Oh, it's my honor. Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful for the incredible work that both of you are doing to make our world a happier place. It's what is desperately needed, and I'm so thankful there are amazing people like you out here doing this work. So thank you. It's an honor.
All right, there we go. That's a wrap on our first episode of season 2. Micah, I tell you what, Steph truly is a beautiful person, isn't she?
Oh, she is such a legend, Karen, and I love that she made the time to chat to us.
Yeah, I know, and it was quite funny as we got towards the end of the conversation there. She was kind of making out like she felt it was such a privilege and an honor to be on our show. I was like, oh, it's like we're stoked to have you.
I know. It just speaks worlds about the type of person she is. And I think it shines through everything she does. If you follow her on Instagram or LinkedIn, or if you've read her book, New Happy, everything she does and puts out there in terms of content, it comes from such a warm place.
And she's such a giving person, and that's so evidently clear and authentic. You know, I feel as though, you know, we spoke to her for nearly 40 minutes there. I think that you can put on a bit of a facade for a small period of time, but to go 40 minutes unfiltered, unedited, like you really got to show your best self. And, you know, that authenticity part around really deeply caring about people really shone through in that conversation for me.
I know. And for me, you know, a few things have stood out. And, you know, like, for example, you know, that she says happiness should be accessible to everyone. And obviously she contributes to that greatly, not just through her book, New Happy, but also, you know, through things like her book club that she runs completely for free in her own spare time. And again, all the content she puts out there. But obviously, you know, she spoke about a few different things. And one of them is also that, you know, the journey to happiness is just not a solo experience. And she spoke about the importance of connection so much, didn't she?
Absolutely. And what a beautiful job she does facilitating that, right? Like, it's not just I'm putting it out there and saying this is what we should do. She's like, I'm putting it out there and I'm going to facilitate opportunities for it to occur. And it just made me think, like, how beautiful would it be if we had more and more people modeling it in such a way? You know, what a beautiful community we could create for society.
100%. And she speaks about the importance of kindness the whole time too. I feel like she just lives and breathes what she, you know, preaches. And I think that's so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way there. And I do love that notion that happiness should be accessible for all. I feel as though there's a huge amount of merit in us, you know, people we're working with in our field, but even, you know, as our listeners, it's like, well, how do we make happiness accessible to those around us as well? I mean, it's got to be hugely beneficial for us to be thinking about how we can do that more for the people that are around us. How can we serve those around us as well? Very keen to hear from you. I know that you were sort of sitting there taking some notes throughout that session, and I could see your mind ticking over. Any big takeaways or things that really resonated with you as we were going through that conversation?
Lots, so I'm not quite sure where to start, but I guess one central theme that definitely stood out to me was that true happiness can coexist with suffering and challenges. So this is something she's mentioned a few times, and you know what goes through my mind when I hear something like that, because I am so influenced by Corey Keyes, who we've had on the show in season 1 as well, in particular his dual continuum model of mental health, you know, of complete mental health. And so the whole notion that I think will yet take a while to trickle through to society, the whole notion that mental health or complete mental health is way more than the absence of mental illness. So the idea that when we talk about mental health, what we think about is usually mental illness, but we know from research that we need both. We need the absence of mental illness and we need the presence of mental well-being. And this is so important to understand. So to get back to what Steph said there, true happiness can coexist with suffering and challenges, tells us a number of things, because only because we have a mental illness diagnosed, so like we've been diagnosed with depression, for example, it doesn't mean that we can't also flourish in life or feel some level of happiness during certain times of the day, for example. And it's important to understand that, because even though we might have a diagnosis of a mental illness, we can still work on our flourishing, and it's so important that we still do something for our mental well-being. So obviously using those terms interchangeably, mental well-being and flourishing, because they basically mean the same thing. So things like personal growth, experiencing joy, setting and working towards goals that are meaningful to us, finding deep engagement in activities that we enjoy doing, and so forth. It is so important we do that, because research shows very clearly that when we flourish and when we have a good level of mental well-being, we are way more likely to recover from mental illnesses and for the recovery to be more sustainable.
Yeah, and this model is absolutely amazing, and perhaps we might even put up a post about it too for people to have a bit more exposure to it, because I know this is something that both you and I really like lean on. This piece of research, this model is amazing in helping people understand, like almost like the spectrums of what this really looks like. And I think it's a really pleasant reminder too, because when we talk about happiness being accessible to all, this really highlights it, right? Because if I'm sitting listening in and going, no, it's so lovely that Karen and Mike are talking about this, but I've got this, I can never get there. And it's like, oh, we can. This model really like highlights what it could look like as well, so clearly too. So yeah, we might put something out that sort of leans into that. And thank you for highlighting that too, because I think that's an important and integral point for our listeners to engage in as well. Particularly, you know, might be going through a bit of a slump at different points in time in our lives. We've had them. You know, and we know through conversations where we know each other, there's been points in time in our life where you're just like, oof, this is tough, but it doesn't mean that we can't be working towards our own little version of happiness and the thriving.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's one thing that ticks
and
for
we
you.
need to.
Yeah.
And because, you know, if we talk about happiness being accessible to all, what we're talking about when we talk about mental well-being or flourishing, you know, these are things that they don't need to cost anything. It just takes a little bit of introspection and understanding what brings us joy or what brings us fulfillment, you know, or who might be the people we love connecting with the most, or who make us feel like we are worthy, or who uplift us and who support us, you know, or how we might still fulfill a role in society or in our community or in our circle of friends and family that, you know, brings us fulfillment as well as the people around us and fosters that connection. So again, thinking of, you know, the three elements of flourishing: the emotional well-being or joy, the psychological well-being or, you know, personal growth and deep engagement, and also the social well-being or the connection with yourself and with the people around you. And just thinking about, you know, what you can do in order to foster either three of them. It doesn't need to cost anything, and it is truly helpful if we always, you know, do something for our flourishing, whether we have a mental illness or not. I think it's so important.
And can I just get you to elaborate a little bit there on that connection with self? Because I think for a lot of people this might be a bit of a foreign concept in really understanding what this might look like. But what is it doesn't even have to be a utopia, but what does a 7 out of 10 maybe look like for somebody, or even for you, in connection with self?
Absolutely. It's having a little bit of self-knowledge. So I like to separate self-knowledge from self-awareness, and we need both, okay? So self-knowledge are things like understanding who you are as a person to some extent. I don't think we can ever fully understand, because we also morph and change as we go through life. The person I am right now will not be the same person I am going to be in 5 years' time, or even maybe next week to some little extent, you know? So having a basic understanding of who you are, your character traits. You know, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Or, you know, where on that continuum do you sit? Or things like, how open are you to new experiences? Or things like understanding your values. What are actually the things that matter most to you in life? And what experiences are you really hoping to get out of this life? What are your strengths? And how can you cultivate them a little bit better? And how can you use them to work towards your goals? What might be your weaknesses? And what can you do to manage them a little bit better? So those, you know, are just some of the examples of what you can do to get to know yourself, for a little bit more self-knowledge. And then also, though, having self-awareness. So being aware of how you feel in any given moment of time, having an awareness of what thoughts might go through your mind, having awareness of your own biases or errors in thinking, of the assumptions you make about the world, of your desires or what you want in life, you know, those kinds of things, and how your circumstances and maybe the people around you affect you in any given moment of time. So, and then being able to manage that. So, but that's how I like to distinguish self-knowledge from self-awareness. So, and that just takes introspection and a little bit, you know, whether that's introspection over the long term by journaling a little bit more and getting to know yourself and, you know, trying new activities out and seeing how they work for you, or hanging out with people and paying attention to how they make you feel. Or maybe what kind of feedback you get from other people. But it also takes introspection in any moment of any day, you know, just paying attention to how things and circumstances make you feel, what thoughts come up for you, and perhaps why, and understanding the triggers behind those as well. What do you think about that distinction?
Oh, No, I think it's a really clear distinction, which I really love, and I'm going to ask you in a moment, what are some more practical tools? You mentioned journaling. Not everyone loves the notion of journaling. You mentioned identifying strengths, so I know that there's some definitely avenues that we can go down there, but what might be some other practical ways that, say if I'm listening in here and I want to learn a little bit more about myself, what are some things that I could practically do?
Absolutely. And I love that you asked me this, Karen, because I think everybody needs to try different things and see what works for them. And, use a combination of different things because they all can give us a little bit of insight. And none of the tools we can use will be the be all end all of, the answer of who you are. Because, again, you can't really pinpoint that so much. But talking about strengths, I'm a big fan of Strength Finder tools. So, for example, the VIA character strengths test is something we can take. That's an evidence-based test. It doesn't even cost anything other than your email address, so you can be sent the results. I think it's a great tool. I recommend it and use it with my clients. Or personality profiling tests. There's a number of different ones you can use. So any of those profiling tests, in order to identify your values, there's values lists you can use that are out there, or other tools and powerful questions you can ask yourself, and you can find most of that stuff. If you dig a little bit through the internet, you can find most of these things for free. But given that you and I are both coaches, of course, I'm also going to say work with a coach, because it's so powerful, isn't it? Because coaches listen actively and they will give feedback. And it's often the blind spots we have about assumptions we have in life that are hard for ourselves to spot, aren't they? And that's when a coach can be really powerful, I think, to work with. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you sort of almost circled back to that, because, feel free to reach out to either of us to talk about coaching, but obviously engaging with a coach is really beneficial. And I love that you mentioned blind spots as a beautiful activity. I love running the Johari window task. I do a little team building activities, and it's just great to have other people help us identify what strengths and characteristics they see in us, but also what are our blind spots, what are the areas that we could, and I tend to sort of use the term areas for growth over weaknesses a lot, because I'm always like, how can we continue to explore the next iteration of ourselves? We're ever evolving, and I don't know, maybe that's just me, the lifelong learner in me, that just goes, I want all the knowledge. But I think that
I 100% agree. And approaching it with a growth mindset, that's very very spot on for our Mitchie, I guess.
Absolutely. So, I think you sort of like articulated that really well, and I think that you've given some practical tools for our listeners, which I really love. So thank you for sharing some really amazing insights there. Like, you're always a fountain of wisdom. I feel as though we could, Steph definitely said that she was happy to come back on for another episode at some point in time. I think that we should. She
did.
Yeah, I think we might have to reach back out to her again. Maybe after she said that she was brainstorming her next book. So it'd be very interesting to hear more about that. The first book's obviously amazing, so it might be a bit more.
And it was an instant international bestseller too.
I know, right? Yeah. And for good reason, practical, relatable, and engaging. So, look, I think that's
going to... illustrations.
Absolutely, super engaging. So, and what a great way to start the season. And I can't believe, that's our season 2, first episode done and dusted. But by gee, we've got some exciting guests to come. And I'm just I thought it might be worthy to wrap here with Steph's words, which I captured during the show, which I thought was really lovely. She was talking about the breakup tool that she uses around reframing some of the language that we use with ourselves, which I thought was quite lovely, and saying that, I did this, I'm a bad person, and then breaking it down. Anyway, the point that she got to, and the essence of using that tool, is to just remind ourselves that we are worthy, even if we aren't perfect. And I really love that. That was a big take home for me, as I made a series of mistakes in the lead up to the interview today. It was a nice little reminder to hear that, and I think maybe for our listeners that's a nice thing for them to hear. So that's a wrap. Episode 1.
Way to finish, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. But looking forward to further exploring the rest of the season and interviewing a bunch more amazing guests. We hope that you enjoyed episode 1. Stay tuned for more exciting conversations.
Thank you for listening to today's show. We hope our conversation helped normalize the struggles so many of us face on the path to success. While on the outside things often look like sunshine and rainbows, this is rarely the experience for anyone behind the facade.
But instead of letting that demotivate you, we hope it does the exact opposite. To let it fuel you to keep pursuing your purpose and realize your potential. Just without the added burden of feeling inadequate and a little more patience, some tips, and self-compassion instead. For further info, head to our website, flourishingunfiltered.com, and get in touch with us via our socials, @flourishingunfiltered.
Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of loneliness, low mental health, or suicidal thoughts, please know that there are people who care and treatments that can help. We've compiled some helplines for you in the show notes.
It's a wrap for Flourishing Unfiltered today. Please give us a follow and leave us a comment and a review. We hope you tune in next time.